Hey Ritter, this is Centaur here. Welcome back to the channel. And today we are looking at the 11th place nation in our second edition review. We'll also be looking at how it's changed going into third edition. If you are thinking to yourself, how the heck did Germany get so low in the rankings? There are German soldiers in the picture, but we're talking about the nation that the German soldiers are blowing out of this bunker. Okay. Um, no, Germany does great in the old edition. They're very strong in the new edition. So don't worry, they're not coming up today. So I hope you didn't get too excited, though. Obviously, if you looked at the name of the video, you know that that's true, and that's not what we're talking about. No, today we're talking about Belgium. Okay. The Belgians, I'm going to be honest, I wasn't looking at initially when I was first looking at armies. They were one of the first I kind of scrolled through when I started playing Bolt Action because my first army was Poland, which meant that I bought the Armies of France and the Allies book. And upon doing that, I just thumbed through to see what they had, but a lot of their stuff didn't really grab me. It wasn't until early to mid 2023 when I had already collected a bunch of the major nations. I was thinking maybe about France, and I was looking at France compared to some of the other Francosphere style nations. Uh, and then I stumbled across Belgium, and I discovered that I really like them. So I'm going to be honest, I have a little bit of a bias because this is one of my favorite armies. I've collected it, I've played a few games with it, and I've really enjoyed it. And so we'll start taking you through the paces. To start off with, as we look at their army special rules, honestly, they're pretty good. The first one, communications breakdown, is not positive, but honestly, it never comes up. It doesn't really change much for Belgium. So because of that, like it's whatever. It is what it is. But no real biggie there. You have your forward artillery doctrine, which is fantastic. I recommend just taking the medium howitzer as your free artillery piece. You can take a medium anti-tank gun if you want to. It's the access you get to your highest level of penetration in this army. Similar to the French army, they didn't mount medium anti-tank guns in any of their armored tanks or other armored vehicles. But they did put them on, standard artillery anti-tank gun chassis. So you could take those if you want to. In general, you are likely to get more work and more value out of a medium howitzer. But if your strategy is I actually want to crack open enemy armor instead of just pinning enemy armor, an AT gun might actually do a better job for you. So it all depends on what you want to do. The way I see it in terms of value, if you're going to take a medium anti-tank gun in second edition and you want it to get good value, it's best if the value starts at 0 points. That's kind of my thinking, right? Will it be necessarily as strong as if you had taken a medium howitzer in a similar style list? Will they perform the same? Who knows? Because too many die rolls and stuff like that to work out. All I know is if you're looking for a reason to take an AT gun in that slot, it's actually not a bad reason. You have your hurriedly conscripted reserves rule as well. So if you take 3 or more inexperienced infantry squads, you get a free inexperienced infantry squad equal to the cheapest one, which is not horrible. Again, we've seen this with the Dutch, and we'll see this with the French as well when they come around. The rule's fine. You can actually take advantage of these better, though, with the Belgians than you can with any of the other nations that get this rule. So in that sense, I'm definitely going to call this an unreserved positive. And because you get access to the Force Publique, you can also technically take an awful lot of bodies. If you really, really just want sheer numbers of people. If you want to play like a partisan army with actual armored support, you can technically play something pretty similar by playing Belgium, which is kind of nice. When you look at HQ, you've got the standard suite for officers, inexperienced to veteran of all stripes, so nothing particularly interesting there. Your forward observers are great. You don't really get an air observer, so you're just stuck, darn it, with the artillery observer, which is a fantastic unit. Your medics are great because you can take regular medics, which are cheap, super cheap. So that's fantastic. No special officers to report on. So again, like a good, well-rounded set here, among the best that we've seen so far. And for your infantry, this is, I think, actually the best set of infantry on the whole in terms of avoiding traps that we've seen to date. Really, all of them have their purpose, and all of them are great. Your inexperienced troops, whether those are standard inexperienced troops or Force Publique troops, are very good. Your standard troops do get access to things like the VB launcher. I'd probably pass on that. But you also get access to the Browning automatic rifle. And this is a really cheap BAR. For 40 points, you can get 6 shots, which is actually really hard to beat in bolt action. Sure, it's an experience, so, -1 to hit. But if you have to have a -1 to hit and you're starting on a 4 plus, and then there's, long range and cover and stuff like that, having a 30-inch range to make sure you actually get to roll dice in the first place instead of being just beyond that range of the standard rifle is quite useful. And you're not having to pay the full 7 points to get the shots of an extra man. You're only paying 5 points. And you're getting added reach on one of those dudes plus the extra shot you're getting. So it's actually really nice. I think it works out really well. For regulars, similarly, you get really good supporting fire options. I recommend taking the BAR. Because BARs are fantastic in second edition. For value, you're going to get really good firepower out of those. You have access to the VB launcher if you want to take a VB launcher. And for one squad in your force, you can take up to 3 light mortars. Admittedly, in second edition, they're like 25 points each, so they're pretty expensive. You're going to be running up cost for those grenadiers pretty quickly. But on the whole, not horrible. If you really want to do indirect fire support and you want to have a chance to potentially do an awful lot of pins in a single turn, try to lock down units by doing small area HE blasts, you can do that. You have access to it, similar to the Japanese ones, except you only can take one. You can't take as many as you want in a platoon like the Japanese can. And your veterans are fantastic. You get 2 options. You get cavalry, which are really good assault units that are very mobile. Or you can go even cheaper for assault and you take the Chasseurs Ardennais. You get access to things like anti-tank grenades as well as just +1 point to add tough fighters on them, which is fantastic. You can take submachine guns on the on the officer if you want to on the NCO. I probably wouldn't, to be honest. I think I'd stick with rifles. You can add a BAR, which I think is actually probably worth looking at. And you still get access to the VB launcher if you want that. I'd probably skip just because you're gonna be, moving up quite a bit. I think the real value here is that for 14 to 16 points, you're getting really good, relatively cheap assault units that all have tough fighters at veteran, which is fantastic. No specialist infantry really, because I kind of included the Chasseurs Ardennais in the normal veterans because they really basically are, and your grenadiers are basically just regular. So in that sense, you don't really get any specialists, but you kind of do. The important thing is none of these are traps. Some of them I probably just wouldn't take from my personal play perspective, but all of them are they all serve a role, and their role is useful. For team weapons, this is mostly still true. You get average to poor machine gun teams because you do get the heavy machine gun team. In third edition, HMGs are great. In second edition, they're really not. And for the points you're paying, it's going to be hard work just trying to get your value out of those. So I probably would skip on those. Your mortar teams are fine. You get light and medium mortars, both of which have their uses. I'm personally more of a medium mortar guy. But, I mean, both of them do have uses in your army. You get access to the AT rifle for anti-tank teams. Not particularly surprising considering the timing and the era, but those are good. They are budget pin machines, and they will do removal against soft targets. Your sniper teams are average at regular and veteran, and you don't get any flamethrowers or special team weapons. I don't personally have a problem with the Belgians not getting access to flamethrower teams because while the French did employ them, and the Belgians did employ an awful lot of French equipment, as far as we can tell, they were never deployed during World War II. They were in very limited supply in the Belgian army at all, probably only limited to engineering units, and there weren't very many of those that saw any action in the front. We don't even know that they were properly upkept and maintained. So I don't personally have a problem with them not having flamethrowers. It is a loss in second edition because flamethrowers are really strong in second edition, but it's fine. I mean, looking at the list as you'll see later, I don't know what you'd cut in order to throw in one flamethrower team. So I think it's fine. As you look at artillery, this stuff is actually really good. You have howitzers, the full suite, all 3, if you want them, but you also often get a choice as to whether you want to take the gun shield, which is actually really nice. In general, especially in second edition, it's generally better to take the gun shield. Gun shield is actually really useful because it just improves the difficulty to wound you by 1. So, you pay for a regular crew, but they're being wounded like they're veterans from the front, which is fantastic. Sometimes, though, you do kind of want to just save yourself like 4 points, 5 points in order to do something. And instead of having to drop a model or drop a whole unit and lose an order dice, you can just choose to drop a gun shield, which is fantastic. So that's good. It's nice to have that flexibility if you want it. Your AT guns are average. You get light and medium AT guns. In general, I wouldn't go above those. In general, I tend to favor howitzers over AT guns, especially in second edition. But on the whole, I mean, again, if your strategy is removal, you can do that for an awful lot cheaper with an anti-tank gun than you can with a howitzer. Your anti-aircraft guns are also really good because you get access to a light anti-aircraft gun, but you also get access to the Bofors 40 millimeter heavy autocannon, which I've talked about before on this channel, and I will continue doing. But the reason why I like it, and this is the Warlord crew, and this is the extra dude that you get that's looking at it, is that they're 5 points cheaper because they only come with 3 crew instead of 4. So instead of paying 60 points, or whatever for your standard heavy autocannon, instead you're paying 55 points, which is really nice. You don't get access to any multiple rocket launchers, but again, those were not particularly common at the time. Technically, the Nebelwerfer existed, but most armies were not running rocket artillery. And when we get to armored support, it's actually pretty good for what you get. You don't get any self-propelled guns or AA platforms or any sort of specialized vehicle here. But your tanks are pretty okay. They're both just machine guns mounted on turrets on tanks. And really, the only difference between the Renault FT-17 and the T-15 from a stats perspective is just, do you want it to be super slow or not? That's really the only difference. T-15 is another 2-man tank. I believe it's made by, I want to say it's the Hotchkiss company, could be the Renault company. I can't remember. It's one of those two. But, companies that are either, French or American that are making tanks in France as part of the French industrial industry. And both of these just have turreted machine guns. And the real question is just how slow you want them to be and what the profile is. These are fine. If you were looking at taking a machine gun team, might be worth it to just consider taking a light tank like this. Personally, I jump a little higher and I'd go for the tank destroyers. You only get 2 options. You get access to the T-13 tank and the Vickers Carden-Lloyd Mark 6 tankette. The only difference between these is that the Carden-Lloyd is just literally the Carden-Lloyd chassis with a light AT gun on it. In fact, believe it or not, it's a light AT gun that's actually of a larger caliber and more powerful than an early war Panzer III. It still has the same stats and bolt action. But for actual real life, these things were actually quite useful, and a number of these AT guns were actually used by the Germans as tank destroyers after they won and defeated the Belgian government because of the strength of their guns. Okay. Again, not reflected in the game, but kind of cool. And we don't really get to talk up Belgium all that much. So here we are talking up Belgium. The T-13 is the exact same in terms of stats, except that it's not open-topped like the Vickers Carden-Lloyd is, costs more points, and it has a coaxial automatic rifle attached to it. Once again, keeping with the theme of we don't do LMGs, we do automatic rifles, because Belgium had their own Browning automatic rifle variant, effectively, that they produced in-house there. And these are both fantastic. One, because they're very cheap ways of being able to do cheap tank dueling. But also, in order to explain this, I need to kind of actually show you the vehicles, okay? Because there are stats, and stats do help, okay? But then there's also the actual presence of it on the tabletop, which, per the way the rules are written, does confer certain benefits. And that's what makes things like the Vickers Carden-Lloyd tankette so good. So to explain that, we're going to do some movie magic, and we're going to cut to showing you what these look like. And movie magic. So this is my beginning work in progress on a British M3 Stuart. This is a tank made by Warlord Games that everybody is probably familiar with if you've gone to tournaments. Still in progress, by the way. I'm planning on doing a Southeast Burma style army for the Far East, and so I decided to just go with a simple tan color, and then I'm going to start adding a bunch of other pigments on top of that. So work in progress. Hopefully you'll see that pretty soon. This is the size of an M3 Stuart. This is the side of your average Joe, right? Your average Tommy, right? That's going next to it, right? This is the size of a Tetrarch light tank. You'll notice it has a shorter profile, well, a shorter height. It has a shorter profile. It is about quarter of an inch, almost half an inch, pretty close to half an inch shorter than the M3 Stuart, which means getting it to be in cover, both because it is shorter to the ground, as well as being shorter in actual length. Both of these help. They're about the same in terms of width. I mean, it like millimeters difference in terms of width, but they're basically the same. So on the whole, pretty much the same. Now, this is the Dutch tankette. It is about half the length and about 2/3 of the height of the M3 Stuart. And the M3 Stuart, by comparison to a lot of tanks that you're going to see on the field, is pretty small, okay? Pretty tiny. But to give you an idea on size, in case you haven't run into these lighter tanks before, this, once again, is the size of your average infantryman. Basically, the same height as an infantryman. If you were playing on a base where he had some sort of rock that he was standing on or help to differentiate that maybe he's the officer or whatever, he might actually be the same height or even taller than this tankette. And in terms of actual size for the base, in terms of depth, as you can see here, it's shorter than 2 infantrymen side by side, which is crazy. Okay, that's just crazy. So when I tell you these things are zippy and they're tiny and you can hide them waiting for people between buildings, when I tell you that you can pivot in an area that's less than 2 inches, like being able to maneuver these things around and fire with them is insane. You have a bunch of these things just running around, shooting at things. It could be really hard to catch them just because you can't actually chase them. You'd have to maneuver around or go completely around another way in order to get where they are. So personally, I think these are worth looking at. But it doesn't end there, folks. I talked about how because they're shorter, it's easier to get cover. I want to give you an idea of what some of that cover looks like. Okay, here's just a random segment of wall that I 3D printed. Here's a random Tommy standing next to it, so you can get an idea of roughly how tall this wall is. Okay, I mean, it's a good size, the kind of wall that you might see along a road or something else like that in the game. This guy's leaning forward, so he's a little shorter than the average dude, but he does peak above the wall. This is the height of the Carden-Lloyd tankette. The gun still fits, by the way, over into this hole, this gap over here. Still fits. But it is basically protected by the wall. If it's moving this direction, you can still technically see it, so it's not getting full cover. But there's no doubt about it that it's getting covered, right? When it's moving behind a wall. Now compare this to our relatively short, relatively small M3 Stuart. This one might get the cover, probably does, but go anything bigger than a light tank, and they're probably not getting cover from this because you're probably going to be able to see half or more of the vehicle. Not so with the tankette. Further thing, in case you're looking for size comparisons, this is a small piece from one of the ruined farmhouses that a lot of us have from Warlord games, okay? I love this kit. I've used this kit so many times. I have a ruined hamlet on my Christmas wish list because I could just use some more, right? Just for the fun of playing with it, okay? We're all familiar with this in terms of its size. Here's its comparison next to an infantryman, okay, which already gives you an idea of what it is we're going to be talking about next. Check this out. The Carden-Lloyd tankette can fire through the door, and it's actually shorter than the door. Believe it or not, the door frame sits slightly above the tankette's top gun shield, effectively. The tankette can shoot through the window over here, and it can fire quite comfortably from the side. That's how short this is. If you ran this thing up into this ruin and started shooting at people, you would have heavy cover from all facings. You would be very, very safe. And that is the kind of thing that you can't measure in stats, right? Because from a stats perspective, the only difference between this and this little Tetrarch and this little tank destroyer, is that this guy is fully buttoned up and he has a coaxial machine gun. All the other stats are the same. But it makes a big difference because this guy probably still gets the cover bonus over here, but there's no living way you're going to have to work a little bit harder to actually keep him safe, right? And there's definitely no way he's going to be able to move to a position where he can actually get out of line of sight. Similarly, this guy is going to be visible, right? Whatever it is that you're looking at, you're not going to be able to say, well, I can't even see the unit, right? So something of this same height, you are still going to be able to see the tank, right? If you had a wall that was this height and the tankette was passing behind that wall, you wouldn't see it in the first place. It would get full cover against that. And that is pretty crazy. So my recommendation is don't sleep on this. I think this little tiny tank is a very effective, efficient means of getting a tank dueler, especially on outflank, that will do work for you. He's very easy to hide, surprisingly survivable, and punches like an M3 Stuart or anything else that has a light AT gun. Technically, it punches at the same strength as a Sharby 1, right? I think it's worth looking into. So, personally, no traps here. I think everything here is great. As you go to the tankettes, similar story. You get the ACG-1, which is, it's actually the AMC-35 from France. It just goes by the name ACG-1 when it comes to the Belgians. And the ACG-1 is a light tank with, a light anti-tank gun, coaxial machine gun. It has the recce rule. Fully buttoned up. It's very good. Very, very good tool. The armored cars, you get the Minerva, which is just it's a machine gun forward facing on an armored car chassis. So I mean it's fine. It's not a particularly amazing or incredible armored car, but it's relatively cheap. And if you just are looking for anti-personnel coverage, it will do a fine job for you. And then transport section, actually, everything here is great. You get access to, the same soft transports that everybody else gets access to, the 12-man truck, the, 3-man civilian car. You also get access to some 4-man cars and even some 6-man heavy field cars, which are fantastic for some super cheap assault squads. You put 6 Chasseurs Ardennais with tough fighters in one of these things, you're looking at about 100 points, and you've got a very mobile, highly effective assault squad, which is really great because you can copy paste that multiple times and you're getting quite a few order dice that are quite effective, doing quite a bit of work for you, which is good. You got armored carriers, which are also great. You get access to both a 5-man capacity half track if you want that. It also can be equipped, by the way, with a 360-degree machine gun if you want to. So that's kind of cool. You also get access to the VUDB Berlier, which is a 7-man fully buttoned up, which the other one is not. Transport with a forward-facing light machine gun, which is awesome. And you technically get some other armored carriers and stuff like that. The utility carrier and stuff like that for them. Those are fine. They're not particularly great, but they're fine. You also get gun transports again because you can get a truck with a machine gun. You get the Berlier. Like if you want fire support coming from your transports after they've moved people up, they're fantastic. Your toes, you get access to horse-drawn limber, which is great, but you also get access to some of those really boxy, Belgian utility toes as well, which, I mean, are fine. The big thing is that they might have a smaller footprint than your average horse-drawn limber model. So in that sense, like if you're looking for a relatively cheap toe just to pad out order dice and stuff like that, they can do that for you while possibly not being as easy to destroy and possibly even not even as easy to shoot at because they might be able to hide more easily behind a smaller building. So on the whole, not bad. Don't get any guns on your toes. And so with that, what are your best choices? Honestly, pick any infantry squad. Depends on what your playstyle is. If you're looking for hordes, you can do hordes really effectively. If you're looking for, a more veteran elite force that sheds models more less quickly, you can do that. If you want to make them assault, it's an option. It's not mandatory. So it saves you some points. If you want to do purely sitting back, possibly even with a bunch of light mortars, you have access to that as well. So whatever your playstyle is, you're going to find it pretty effective from Belgium. You got mortars and AT rifles. Honestly, those are probably your best supporting units, to be honest. Snipers are fine, but it all depends whether you have those extra 50 points lying around. You got medium howitzers and your AA guns, which I think between those two, I think that's probably where you want to live. AT guns are fine if you really want them. And then you have super cheap tank destroyers. You've got MMG tanks if that's, just to save some points, if that's what you want to do. And a recce tank dueler with the ACG-1, which I think is fantastic. And then that combo of the VUDB Berlier with the Chasseurs, I think are fantastic. So toward that end, here's the list that we're running. It's only 14 order dice at 1,000 points, but I think it could work out pretty well. We've got, a second lieutenant with a furtherman, taken regular because I didn't really have points to throw anywhere else. I could have added a couple of toes or something like that if I dropped the furtherman, dropped the whole thing down to inexperience, but I just didn't feel like it. I was like, yeah, it's fine, the way it is. And then we've got 7 of our assault-oriented Chasseurs Ardennais. They've got tough fighters with the BAR, just because I figure once they've removed somebody off of an objective, let's have them do some fire support down the line. We also have a 6-man cavalry squad taking veteran because we have to. This is probably the most I would do in 2nd edition for a veteran cavalry squad. They get pretty expensive if you go any higher than that. But on the whole, I think they're fine. I think these work out pretty well. And for clearing out team weapons specifically, I think that this will be a highly effective sort of mobile unit to cover everybody else. We got a regular AT rifle team. We've got an inexperienced medium mortar team. We've also got a medium artillery with a spotter as our forward artillery doctrine-free unit. So we paid 10 points for the spotter, but that's it. And then I took that cheaper Bofors 40 millimeter auto gun because you know what? That AA gun, if you can get the same thing everybody else gets for 5 points cheaper and you just got to keep it alive 1 man longer, that's actually pretty good. I like that. I took the Vickers Carden-Lloyd Mark 6 tankette because if I talk this guy up for several minutes in a video, you better believe he's going to make an appearance in a list. And then the ACG-1 Recce tank because it's basically a Cromwell but more durable with Recce, which is awesome. And then we've got 3 VUDB Berlier carriers, all taken at regular, so that way both we don't suffer the -1 to hit with the light machine guns that are on board. And in addition, they're just more likely to activate once they're up and in there, getting ready to drop off the men and do the job. And I think that will work out pretty effectively to just take objectives really aggressively while still having that long-range fire support coming in to make sure we're pinning down units while we're on approach. The result is an army that's pretty flexible, moves around quite a bit, can play really in your face if you want to. But honestly, if you have an objective that doesn't require you to move out, let's say that you're just playing a mission where you just got to remove enemy units, you could sit back with all of this, right? Because none of these are fillers, right? We haven't taken any toes that are just there to contribute in order dice. All of these can fire down at the enemy. All of these are effective. And so because of that, you can do more of a gunline approach with this army as well, depending on what the scenario requires. So when we look at Belgium in 3rd edition so far, honestly, haven't really lost anything that was really good, and everything's actually gotten a little bit better. For starters, your infantry are still really good all around. Your options are fantastic. Again, they haven't made you pay for anything that you wouldn't necessarily want to pay for. Your light mortars are now only 20 points each instead of 25, which is fantastic. Heavy machine gun teams got an improvement just in general with the rules without really getting a cost improvement. AT rifle teams got a stats improvement with a points reduction, which I think is fantastic. You can take more of the cheaper Bofors heavy autocannons, which is fantastic. Love it when that happens. Your tank destroyers are more accurate now because if they're doing fire or ambush, they get a +1 to hit, which is great. And you can take more than one of these little guys. So I think that's also really fantastic. Or more than one of the ACG ones if you want something that's a little more durable and has a recce rule. Then that's also great. You get access to a 27-point command vehicle in the heavy field car taken with the command vehicle special rule, which is excellent. And you get access to a 21-point damage value 7+ armored tractor, which I don't generally believe in paying 21 points for an armored tractor. However, if I want mobile heavy cover moving ahead of a Berlier, a cavalry squad, Chasseur Ardennais squad, or anything else like that, I can. And I can get it for pretty cheap. And if it gets blown up, then it becomes impassable terrain to the enemy and still heavy cover, which is great. So on the whole, and the Berlier got cheaper. The Berlier is cheaper because in general, the cost of armored transports went down. So like, how do I feel about the Belgians? I feel like Belgians are awesome going into the new edition. I do feel like they lack a little bit of that spice. I feel like similar to some of the other nations, especially those colonial territory aspects weren't really communicated in the original book. Like we got the Force Publique, which is the defenders of the Belgian Congolese forces down there, those colonies. And honestly, it's not really accurate as to how it was presented. So I think there's some room for improvement. And that's kind of where we'll go as we transition into things that I would change. So first of all, I would add more Congolese options. Okay, I would add the, you have these local veteran defenders with the Askari troops down there. And so, these are men who have actual combat experience. They've done a lot of fighting. We don't really have that represented with colonial forces, so maybe make them, veterans who start with access to tough fighters or something like that. And, maybe they always have, maybe they don't get the same actions for supporting weapons, but maybe they get access to British weapons because a lot of British arms were used down there. So maybe instead of a BAR, they get access to an LMG, right? Maybe they don't get access to a grenade launcher, but maybe they get access to, I don't know, something else, maybe more submachine guns or something like that. Just make them a little bit different. I would also add Bren carriers because Bren carriers were heavily used by Congolese forces, especially after the fall of the Belgian government and the Congolese support for British troops. in the North African campaign, which tends to go overlooked. A lot of people don't remember that. So I give them access to Bren carriers in case people want to keep it, traditional. Do you necessarily need the Bren carrier when you have the Citroen half track armored transport or the Berlier? Technically, no. But if you want to keep it accurate, give them access to the Bren. I don't think it's a problem. They also use Bedford trucks down there. So if you want to give them access to like a 29-man capacity truck, I mean, why not? Right? What's the problem with doing that? I don't think there's an issue there. I would also give different veterancy levels for the Force Publique. I don't know that necessarily we should give them access to veterans, though again, they did take part in the North African campaign. So maybe give them access to veterans because you might want to, kind of recreate the ending part of that after they've been on campaign for a while. But they definitely had trained troops to the order of like 10 to 40,000 men, depending on what you're looking at within a different part of the interwar period. So I think at least giving you access to Force Publique, taken as they normally are inexperienced, but giving them access to a regular squad, I think would be fair. And I would say personally veteran as well, but I mean, I'm open to discussion. And the nice thing about this is that this way of building out Belgium actually gives you access to what I think your three subtypes could be. We've been seeing with the release of the new Armies of books that there are, in fact, typically three subtypes that are given out for ways to build your forces, and we kind of have those with Belgium, which we don't necessarily get with other armies that we've seen so far. We could have, the traditional Dutch army, which I would just give them access of, say, like, an extra +1 point for stubborn, kind of a Ebene Mail style defense force. You could even call it the Ebene Mail Defenders if you want to. I wouldn't necessarily, because again, there was more than just the relatively lopsided and relatively quick fall of the fortress at Ebene Mail. But, just they had a lot of grit. You see them kind of digging in as best they can for being outflanked by the Germans. And so I just give them a choice of, you take units at whatever veterancy, so that way you can have your rushed, inexperienced conscripts if you want to. But you have a choice of paying +1 point for stubborn. Is stubborn particularly good on inexperienced troops? Probably not. But hey, you can get that stubborn doggedness if you really want to. I don't have a problem with that. And of course, you could take those on regulars or veterans if you wanted to. The second squad would be your Chasseurs Ardennais. These are your, longer range troops who have a little more training, especially in mountainous terrain, forested terrain along the borders with Germany. And so these chasseurs, I would give them. You could go the Panzer Grenadier route if you wanted to, because they were typically mounted up, typically in Berliers. But I don't know. I want to keep it a little more interesting, and so because of that, make it so they have to take veterans only. And well, you could go the Panzer Grenadier route. I would probably just give them +1 point for fieldcraft because they really were more of like a forested mountainous area sort of thing. So I see them being more like a Gebersjäger force instead of like a Panzer Grenadier force, personally. And then your third group would be your Force Publique. And your Force Publique would be just a choice, so not required to take this, similar to, Chasseurs Ardennais, and similar to, like, other armies that we've seen released so far, where you could choose to pay +1 point per man on the squad for a free run order on turn 0 that triggers ambush. So this would be similar to the Sparrow tactics that we saw with China in a previous video. And it's similar to the Rangers Lead the Way special rule, right? Where with the U.S. Rangers in the Armies of U.S. book, you can pay an extra +1 point per man for any infantry section, whatever, to take a free move action on turn 0. The reason why we are allowing this to trigger an ambush for the Belgians, though, which isn't allowed with Rangers Lead the Way, is because you could take a whole lot of inexperienced troops with Force Publique and have a bunch of inexperienced heavy machine gun teams and mortar teams and infantry sections and stuff like that. So you're going to be moving up a lot more because that +1 point is coming on a much lighter, much cheaper chassis than a bunch of U.S. Rangers and things that have to be taken veteran. So I'm okay with saying the exchange you get for more guys probably getting to do this is that you might take some damage in response. I think what it means is just be intentional about which guys you trigger first and which guys you move first to trigger those ambushes. So that way the people that you really need to not have pins on them and not have men removed, they're more okay. So that's how I would run it. I think that would make for a very interesting sort of force. The reason also why I gave the Force Publique this is because like they were known for covering a lot of distance and moving a lot of miles during the African campaign. And so I wanted to represent that. And there really aren't a whole lot of ways to represent that because I don't want to monkey around with move in inches every turn or things like that. I'd rather just be, well, they started up further up than you guys did because they got to the location faster. And I feel like that's a better way of looking at it. And so I think each of these would reward different things. Your Dutch army would be more of a defensive, resilient sort of force, really effective for a gun line. Your Chasseurs Ardennais would be really better if you plan to do some mobility maneuver warfare, but you still plan on probably having to stick it on an objective somewhere else. And then your Force Publique would be more if you want to play just really forward aggressive, you want to play from the middle of the table, you want to play closer up to the enemy sort of stuff, whether that's a range of inexperienced, regular, or veteran troops. And I think it would work out pretty okay. So in terms of new special rules, unsurprisingly, I think that these are, again, very copy-paste. They're exact copies of what you get from other armies in the game, in the Francosphere, and I don't like that. So I want them to feel a little bit different. And so I dug back through history, how they prepared for World War II in the interwar period and stuff like that, and this is what I came up with. So the first is artillery focus. And this goes to the fact that when the Belgians started setting up fortresses like Eben-Emael, what they would do is because it was set back into their territory, they were able to set up markers going out from the fortress to show range. So that way, when the crew was looking at enemies coming through and coming against the fortress, they could already tell what the range was. And it made ranging in and targeting an enemy that you could see, and this is important, an awful lot easier. So you could get your angles and make sure that you can fire with a lot more accuracy. It also served as a secondary check against your range finding equipment on your howitzers to make sure that you were properly dialed in and you were properly calibrated, because moving one of these markers was extremely difficult to do. So you knew that that was probably the accurate measurement. The result is that this special rule would allow regular and veteran howitzers, so not inexperienced crew, you have to go through formal training, okay? When they fire direct fire, so we've done some changes to allow people to reroll things when they're firing indirect. This is direct fire only. They can reroll failed hits because they wouldn't actually get that first result. They would probably actually get the second result. And I think this is interesting. I think it means that obviously in boards that have a lot of terrain, you're actually going to be fighting pretty close to yourself, all things considered, right? You won't be able to take advantage of this over long distances, probably. But if you have some of those long roads, this could make it a good one for covering along long roads. Could also just be good for, again, if you happen to be playing on a board that is a little bit more open, right? You never really know what you're going to get in a tournament setting. If you would pay more for a howitzer than you would for a comparably sized and level artillery choice, then you are slightly more accurate, and that means you're slightly more likely to get your value out of it, especially since, again, direct fire high explosive damage doesn't ignore cover saves. Right? So it's not like, oh, we're making it a lot easier to get people out of objectives that they may be holding. Maybe, maybe not, right? I mean, it's more likely that you're actually getting to roll potential dice to wound instead of not, right? So on the whole, I think this works out really well, and I think it's interesting and thematic for what they did. And the second special rule is called fire support, and this gives your machine gun teams and your heavy machine gun teams the extra selection special rule, similar to what the United States has. This comes down to the fact that just for sheer counting of weapons, the number of machine guns that were fielded by Belgium per capita is like top 5 in the entire war, okay? And when you look at it from a platoon level, okay, because like they technically fall behind, I think they were behind like Hungary, for example, but Hungarian platoons in terms of numbers of men were actually larger. So when you look at it by platoon basis, what you actually find is that they actually had more per platoon than most other nations were fielding. It came out to, I think, about like 12 to 15 per company, which is a lot. Now, admittedly, this is partially because you have, companies and divisions being put in these defensive positions like Eben-Emael that are preset, and they are just bristling with machine guns. They knew exactly what they wanted. They were like, nope, we're going to make it so that if you have to come through a specific gap, because there weren't really that many ways to approach Belgium, if they're coming through a specific gap, we know that we need to keep consistent suppressive fire against them to make sure the infantry can't move up without substantial casualties. So we're going to have a substantial number of machine guns. And the result is, I would really love to see a way to reward that beyond Poland that did not employ this tactic, Bulgaria that did not employ this tactic, right? Other nations that technically in the game can field just as many machine guns. And the easiest way to do that, extra selection. And then we will give you a choice depending on your play style and what you would like to play. And the first is called defensive position, and this allows you to play a free 6-inch by 6-inch with 3 sides of heavy cover piece of terrain on the board after board edges have been assigned, but before units go down. And this is very similar to the Italian defensive special rule from 2nd edition, where they, if they were the defender, they got to place like D3 of these in an attacker defender scenario. In this case, you only get to place one, which I think is fine because I like the idea of leaving something a little more unique for Italy, which we'll be talking about within the next couple weeks. But also because this was the Belgian approach, right? Like they didn't actually have plans for offense. They were dug in at every point that they fought. Didn't always help because sometimes the Luftwaffe and Fallschirmjäger are really just going to mess your day up because you didn't have sufficient anti-air defense, right? But it really does reflect their mindset, which is that they want to be able to sit back in a protected zone. And this allows it to be a little more reliable that it happens because, again, the board is something you cannot predetermine, right? You do not know for sure that you're going to get to play on a specific style of board that's built a certain way. Alternatively, if you don't want to just go and, kind of go all in on that defensive bonus, you can take forward artillery doctrine, which is just the same as the get you by PDF, giving 2 shots to your artillery forward observer. I think it's fine. Artillery observers are fine. They work out pretty okay. It's one of the easiest ways to get a heavy howitzer now into the game because, because the cost at now 150 points, you're paying double as much to get a heavy howitzer as you would by just taking an artillery observer. Admittedly, may not get hit by said heavy howitzer, might just be pins from said heavy howitzer as most of the results. But hey, if you're looking for a heavy howitzer shot, at least you're getting fired that 2 times per game. Assuming that you can keep your observer alive, so make sure you take care of him. I think it's fine if you really want to take it. So on the whole, what do I think of Belgium? I think Belgium is one of those nations that could actually be really, really strong, both in 2nd edition and in 3rd edition, but especially I think in 3rd edition because of your unit choices and the fact that almost anything that you can take is good. It just matters as to whether it fits into your overall strategy. And so my recommendation is going to be, even though from a stats perspective, a lot of stuff is hidden, or a lot of stuff just looks like other nations can take it, a lot of other nations are paying points for stuff that you're not paying for. And so, because of the effectiveness of really cheap, high firepower units, don't sleep on Belgium. I think Belgium is worth going after. And the nice thing, too, is while I hear the argument that buying minor nations is often very expensive, here's the nice thing about it. Belgian helmets, Adrian's. French helmets. Belgian rifles, overwhelmingly French rifles. Sans the BAR, obviously. French uniforms were pretty similar to Belgian uniforms, but the Belgians did wear greatcoats depending on time of year, which means if you want a cheap way of building Belgium, considering that the artillery and the anti-tank guns are often the same as well, just buy a French set of men. Buy French infantry, French artillery, French all that sort of stuff if you want to. Maybe do pick up like, a Belgian autocannon team or something else like that, because they do sell them at Warlord, and so, they do look a little bit different, which is nice. Pick those up. That's super cheap blisters. You don't have to buy metal models in order to get these. You can get them for a whole lot cheaper by buying the pretty beautiful plastic sprues. And while you might have to do some conversion and maybe chopping up some of the hats, you could build colonial forces as well using those sets, which is rather nice. So I think Belgium is surprisingly easier to collect than most people give it credit for. I think that they are quite effective as an army, even without some of the rules changes that we're recommending. They are quite effective. And so you should be taking a closer look at Belgium, in my opinion. But did I get this wrong? Am I hyping up super tiny, easily fits everywhere, still hits really hard with their anti-tank gun, tank gets a little too much? Am I hyping up you can take pretty much whatever you want and none of it's going to be bad for you as long as it fits into your strategy a little too much? Did I place Belgium higher than some of the armies that we've talked about recently and you think that they really should be pushed a little further down? Let me know in the comment section down below, and I will see you next time.